SlyFlourish recently put out a tweet that started a little bit of a Twitter argument. And I usually agree with SlyFlourish. That's why I follow him. I like seeing his perspectives on different ideas and things to do with D&D. But for this one, I had a few issues with it, as did apparently some of the people in the comments, though I'll try to be a little nicer. Here are the rules as written. When a player knocks a NPC or monster to 0 HP, if they're using a melee attack, they can declare that they want to do non-lethal damage and knock them out instead. So basically, the change that he is suggesting is that you can knock them unconscious with ranged spells or arrows, things like that. And some of the statements backing this or in support of this argument is that it makes it more fun. This is one of the tweets here that basically says that it's powerfully more fun to do it this way than the other way, and it's tiresome to have to declare that you're doing non-lethal damage every time, and it nerfs spellcasters and ranged people if you don't do this. And if it doesn't make sense, a lot of the comments, again, supporting this are ones like this that just says it's all pretend anyway, so, you know, you're using magic. It doesn't really matter if it doesn't make sense. Though it was kind of pointed out, how do you cast Fireball, or as this person, I cast Disintegrate, but non-lethally though. But again, in response to that was this tweet, which it unnecessarily nerfs spellcasters, which ranged people would also fall into as like an archer. And the game, again, is make-believe. It's not that realistic anyway. I have a few issues with this argument, and I'm going to tackle them in reverse order. So starting with, it's all pretend anyway. It's a world filled with magic and anything can happen. I completely agree with that sentiment. I hand wave a lot of rules for the sake of fun. But you should be very careful in doing that, and it should increase the level of fun at the table, because the more you kind of just hand wave logic issues and say it's all pretend, it's a world of elves and magic and whatnot, the more it kind of ruins your immersion. And that is one of the aspects that I enjoy about D&D, is kind of getting in a mindset that the world could be real. I know that it's not, but I have more fun if I can believe that it could be real, that in another universe out there, that these things could be happening. So when certain things just don't make any sense, I like to adjust the rules to make them make more sense. But again, sparingly. You don't want to bog the game down or ruin the fun for the sense of realism. This is not a simulator game. And because of that, I'm willing to just use that as an excuse to allow certain things to happen for the sake of fun, but it has to make the game more fun. And I don't think that this rule does that. If you do, then the rest of the arguments don't really matter. So I'm okay hand-waving certain rules as long as it makes the game more fun. But I don't think that this one does. If you think that it makes the game more fun, then the rest of the arguments don't really matter. Do what's more fun for you. But here's why I don't think that it makes the game more fun. Moving on to the it nerfs certain characters, I don't think it really does. But to be fair, I don't like the rules as written for knocking characters unconscious in general. The way I like to run it is, if you ever played Mount and Blade, if you wanted to capture more prisoners, you had to use bludgeoning damage. So you had to have all your people swap to clubs and things. That's how I like running it. Bludgeoning damage knocks people unconscious. There's no way to stab someone but do non-lethal damage. If you're in melee range, you can hit someone with the pummel of your hand, but either way, you have to do bludgeoning damage to knock someone unconscious. And there are magic equivalents. Force damage works very similarly to bludgeoning, and I would even allow psychic damage to knock people unconscious opposed to killing them. But knocking them out is not the only option, which takes me over to the player agency argument, where it takes away your player's agency to not allow them to knock people unconscious. First off, it should actively be harder to capture someone than to kill them. So if you are trying to capture someone, it should be harder than if you were just to kill them, because you're kind of having to pull your punches a little bit. But knocking them out isn't the only option. There are decisions. This gives opportunity for more social characters, like a bard or someone, to have more of an effect. Maybe you can persuade the person to surrender. You've gotten them under half health, and they're looking pretty beaten up. They don't want to die, so you might just be able to persuade them to surrender. And I am a fan of decisions and players having to use other tools. And I recently actually had this happen in one of my games, where the party needed to capture someone and bring them back alive, and it forces them to make decisions. So when the person was getting beat up, they ended up, the fighter ended up knocking them unconscious with a headbutt. He had them grappled, they were at 2 HP, and he just headbutt them and knocked them unconscious. But they were being very careful about the damage that they were dealing because they didn't want to kill the person. What happens if they would have accidentally killed the NPC that they were supposed to capture? Here are the rules for what happens when an NPC or a monster falls to 0 HP. I don't particularly like rolling death saves for NPCs and monsters. My assumption is without intervention from the players that they will die. So they have 30 seconds to use medicine checks or healing magic or healing spells to stabilize the person and save them. There are options for these characters, and I would allow them to be as creative as they can be in coming up with ways to do non-lethal damage, but just letting them shoot someone with an arrow or blast someone with fireball and say, I wanted to knock them unconscious. Or rules as written, hack someone with your great axe and say, well, that was non-lethal damage. I'm just not a big fan of that. And so that's why I disagree with this rule. But again, it's all about fun, so run it however you want, but those are my opinions on this. Thanks.